Hi, everyone. My name is Angie You. I'm the CEO of Architect Therapeutics, and I'm super excited today to start off a first of what is hopefully many webinars sponsored and organized by Elevate, a new nonprofit that's focused on increasing representation of Asian Americans at the most senior levels across biotech and pharma across the entire ecosystem. I am super excited here today to share a conversation with two of my longtime good friends, Ken Song and Tao Fu. Ken is CEO of Candid Therapeutics and Tao Fu is CEO of Attovia Therapeutics. And I am lucky enough to actually be on both of their boards. So very quickly, I thought it'd be great for Ken and Tao to just quickly introduce their companies. Ken?
You want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. Hey, nice to see everyone, or I guess I don't technically see you, but thanks for joining. My name is Ken. I'm the CEO of a company called Candid Therapeutics. We work on T-cell engagers to deplete B cells for inflammatory diseases.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tao Fu. I'm the CEO of Attovia Therapeutics. So we are a biologic platform company really focus on developing bispecific and multispecifics in immune-mediated disease. We're just entered the clinic this year.
And just to remind everyone, there is a chat function, so feel free to ask us tough and provocative questions. We do aim to make this at least Asian level spicy in terms of the conversation. And with these guys, I have no doubt that's going to happen. And just quickly, as the title of the webinar probably mentioned, we met while we were at McKinsey. But beforehand, Ken had a probably similar upbringing to me in that we both grew up in the suburbs. He grew up in Michigan, where probably we were the one of very few Asians. But then he did the stereotypical Asian route, went to MIT for college, and then went to UCSF for med school before he went on to McKinsey. Tao, meanwhile, grew up with lots of Asians because he grew up in China and actually went to college in China and only came into the country to get his master's in biology, followed by his MBA at Vanderbilt before we all met. I really can't believe it's been a quarter of a century, but we do have a question from one of our registrants, Andy, who asked, how did your time as McKinsey consultants shape your ability to lead a biotech company? And what skills or insights from consulting have been most valuable in your transition to the CEO role?
Yeah, I think it's just, before we answer that, I just want to put and let everyone know we're talking about a quarter of a century ago, right? Angie, Tao, and I were at McKinsey. And as we were getting into this, I was like, oh my goodness, when you can start referencing things in like century terms, even if they're partial, then you know that we've obviously been experienced and have been around the block a few times. So yeah, I mean, I was at McKinsey we were all at McKinsey around the 2000 time period. I was there just for about 2 years. Look, I mean, just to be honest, like consulting just wasn't for me. Right? I mean, you go from one client to another, and I think you're more at sort of the 50,000 foot level. But I think the thing for me that was probably the greatest takeaways being at McKinsey was, number one, is really just the network. I mean, there's a lot of people that I'm still in touch with today, especially Angie and Tao here together. And I think the other thing is, had I not been to McKinsey, I don't think that I would have built the network that ultimately got me into venture. And then once I was a venture capitalist, that actually got me to being an operator. People aside, in terms of skills, and that is the place where I would say I learned how to do Excel modeling, which I still do to this day quite a bit. Yeah. And then the other thing was making slides in PowerPoint. And so still to this day and through all my companies, I still make all my own slides. So don't outsource that, because that is a skill set you built at McKinsey.
Tao, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. First of all, I echoed Ken. I mean, the network is fantastic. So in addition to three of us, I just like to give a shout out to Jeff Tong, who is the managing partner for Third Rock Ventures. Basically, four of us were sort of the Asian faces in San Francisco a quarter century ago. And
actually, that's true. Most of the partners were white. Like there was Philip Ma, but there was very little diversity at the top.
That's right. And, we just enjoyed our, friendship over the years. And, we had this JP Morgan dinner we always do for the last 10, 15 years. And there's a lot of other people, right? The network has just been, tremendous. I think one thing I learned from McKinsey is sort of the way to communicate from the top down. That's kind of something I realized. It's just like being trained as a scientist, you always try to approach communication sort of from bottom up, right? Build up your evidence and then you make conclusions. But in the executive world, you actually need to do top down. I think they call it the pyramid principle, right? You start from the very top and then go down. That's something I learned. I think it's actually quite helpful.
I think that's a really important skill. And now I can't stand it when people do give the bottoms up. I'm like, just give me the so what, right? We learned that.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Remember, like the McKinsey deck, and I think sometimes people have trouble with this, is the first page is the executive summary that basically summarizes the entirety of the deck. Exactly. But in a way, like it's very efficient, right? Because you kind of know what the conclusion is, right?
And that's exactly how we do board decks. Right.
That's right. Exactly. You write a summary and then you build the deck, right? So,
I think the great skills at McKinsey is the financial modeling, just not being afraid of that, learning how to do that. My slide skills suck at this point because the old McKinsey format's looks pretty dated now, right? But
are you saying that my slides look dated?
They're very clear. I like that. Lots of bullet points. But I do think the other thing is it gives you the skill to take a huge problem, break it down, and get it done fast, right? There's an element of speed in terms of that, learning how to do that 80-20 to get to the answer that I think was a really important skill. But I agree with you, Ken. I mean, consulting was definitely not for me. Like I just learned you're just on the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, what's interesting is, obviously there's a lot of management consulting firms out there, and that's an entire profession. And look, it's for some people. I don't think it was for any of us, obviously.
None of us stayed for more than 2 years. So.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect amount of time. 2 years.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, right? Like, what is, like, I guess, for people that are here that have been consultants or are thinking about it, right? What is the right amount of time where you feel like if you don't want to be a lifelong consultant, how much time should you spend, in consulting or banking or maybe even investing? Because some of us also have those experiences. If you want to be an operator, I'm curious as to each of your thoughts, like what is the right tenure, right? Before you think you've kind of extracted the bulk of what you can before you should move on.
I think a few years is ideal because the challenges, like we just talked about, at the end of the day, it's about the experience of being an operator if you want to be an operator. So you kind of tap out on your learnings, whether as an investment side or banking side or consulting. I think, 2 to 3 years. And then now you just got to go and learn drug discovery, learn how to just operate.
No, I totally agree. I think consulting is a bit of an academic exercise, right? So you got to try to get to the practical world as soon as you can after that, initial learning, because it's very different from consulting now.
Yeah, I think something I've seen that's a misconception by some folks is that you should spend a lot of time, whether it be as a banker or a consultant or whatever, and then move on. I mean, I agree with you, like 2 years seems about the right period of time. It's kind of like how long an MBA is. And so, and I do think one of the things that I've seen in talking with folks is if you end up spending a lot more time, like as a consultant or a banker, and then you try to move over into industry as an operator, it's actually really hard, right? Because it's not like if you have X number of years, like you're like, oh, I'm a partner now at a consulting or a banking place. You actually don't have much practical skills, right, to help out an actual biotech company. But you're also so senior within your respective service function that it's going to be hard for you to come in and be like, oh yeah, let me be a VP, right?
Yeah, and your salary expectations, right? It's just totally off from your skill set to be an operator. So I'm always trying to pull people out earlier from various places and just get into operating quickly.
Yeah.
I think like for those people that are listening, like if you're in that boat and if you're thinking about being an operator, I do think it's useful at the 18 to 24 month mark to make a, that's kind of a fork in the road, right? Like you're either saying, okay, I've learned enough, now I'm going to leave because I want to go become an operator and, and work in a company. Or if you don't, I think you're basically telling yourself that you'll be satisfied with a career, right, as a consultant, banker, investor, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that may be in your DNA. Like I tell everyone, you just have to figure out what's in your DNA of what you love, right? So, Ken and Tao, I want to talk about your different careers and paths to get to CEO. And I think what's also fun is the different ways our personal interactions have intersected throughout that. So, Ken, I like to take a little credit for getting you back into the business side, because after McKinsey, you actually decided to go back into medicine.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so for me, I'm like the person that left medicine twice. I left medicine to go to McKinsey, then I went back to medicine. And actually, I loved it. I mean, I did residency, fellowship, and research, and I was going to stay in academia, but then I got a call from someone saying, "Hey, look, we're looking to bring on a clinician with business understanding into venture." I called
Oh,
Angie.
but Ken, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I feel like I pulled you in on a Venrock project.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Right. I have to claim some credit here because I think I got you
Yeah.
back excited about the business
That's
side.
true. I was on the liver transplant service as a fellow. I remember like building financial models and trying to like evaluate whether or not like this particular deal would make sense. So, yeah, definitely kudos to you, Angie, for that. And then when an opportunity sort of literally presented itself out of left field as I was finishing my fellowship, I contacted Angie. I'm like, hey, what's this whole venture capital thing? I said, is this consulting? She's like, no, it's totally different. But
And
yeah,
you had already gotten exposure to Venrock because I was at Venrock when I pulled you into that project.
right. That's right. And that's ultimately where I ended up going. 2007, I went to Venrock, and I know at that time you were in the path of just transitioning to go do a company at that point.
Right. Because I knew I never wanted to do venture. I wanted to operate. So my whole role at Venrock was focus on going into companies and trying to help them with business development or starting a company.
Yeah, I mean, whereas for me, when I went to Venrock, I actually went in with the intent of thinking, I'm going to do this indefinitely. This is going to be my career, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to do. So yeah, many different, and then obviously we're all here today as CEOs. And so Angie was purposeful, I think, in when she was at Venrock, knowing she did not want to be a long-term investor. I went to medicine, I was an investor, then ultimately became a CEO, and I've been doing that for the last 15 years. But like Tao, like maybe this is the many paths to being CEO. Like what happened to you after McKinsey? And then maybe I think it'd be interesting for folks to hear about how you ended up where you are today, because it was also a very different path.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ken. So my first job after McKinsey, I was actually hired by a McKinsey client, a biotech company called Siles, to do business development for him. And a year after, we were acquired by J&J. So I ended up joining the J&J organization, and I never thought I will actually stay with large pharma for a long time, but actually, they give me a lot of opportunities. I kind of grew up through the rank, mostly in the BD function. First run cardiovascular and immunology licensing. I brought Xarelto, which is a large mega blockbuster for J&J during the time, and then they asked me.
Oh, wait, but talk a little bit about that, because there's another intersection. I mean, how Angie and I, we left McKinsey around 2002, but maybe talk about that time period and how you and Angie, and we keep on crossing paths with Angie.
Exactly. So after that role, I was promoted to be the head of M&A, and I recall this is back in 2012. Angie, you called me, and Angie was the chief business officer for this biotech company called Aragon, and they were developing apalutamide, which is a treatment for prostate cancer. And Angie said, we're in play. So are you interested in, looking at our company? It turns out to be a very big strategic area for J&J, and I actually led the transaction team to do that deal.
You were head of M&A.
I was head of M&A. Angie
side.
was the CBO. We're on the opposite side of the negotiation table. It feels a little odd, but actually that trust and friendship help overcome a lot of the issues, right? Remember, Angie, there was an active litigation going on, by another biotech. There was technical issues, CMC issues. But I think we overcame all that, and we also did something pretty innovative at the time because we're not interested in the third asset, right? So we basically bought Aragon and allow you and Rich Heyman to spin out the company called Saragon. It was, and then Rich sold it twice.
Yeah. And that was Tao's brainchild. I mean, every other company, as we were doing the process, the BD process, every other company wanted both the assets, right? And Tao said, look, we're not going to value the breast cancer assets as much as you value it. And frankly, you guys are going to do better in that early drug discovery and pushing that forward than we are. So why not leave that on the table for you? And now it's become a model that many people talk about, like, hey, can we do the Aragon-Saragon type deal?
Yeah. And it's great, Angie. I think ultimately, I just checked recently that apalutamide is a $3 billion product for J&J and probably benefiting tens of thousands of prostate cancer patients. I think that's really the rewarding part of this industry, right? We help patients, but these enduring friendship and relationship actually carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, I mean, I don't actually know the answer to this, Tao. I mean, just so that the listeners know, I mean, so Tao's at J&J doing all these big deals. Then he goes to BMS and sort of runs the M&A group there. I mean, like a really incredibly successful career in pharma. And then I think you went to Zai Lab. Is that like what?
Actually,
like,
I went to Portola.
Yeah.
Oh, Portola. That's right. Portola. That's right.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit of the thinking there. I think I've been pretty successful in this BD track. I kind of
pretty successful. I mean, you're very successful. I mean, you could have made your career in pharma, and so I think particularly for some of our listeners who are, it's very
one
rare.
of the things we're saying, like, it's so rare to see senior Asian leadership in pharma. So I don't know what your secret was, Tao, but
what was your secret? But also, what were you thinking when you left?
I think sort of I guess the secret sauce for me, as I reflected, is I think I just don't give up, right? I'm very persistent, very tenacious, and that's a really important trait to be successful in business development. But at the time, I felt I kind of reached a ceiling. I want to do something different. I interact with a lot of biotech companies, obviously, so I saw that's also just a more dynamic, and I was fortunate to be hired by a good friend, Bill Liss, to be the chief commercial officer for him at Portola. So that was sort of my foray into biotech. I actually, build a sales and marketing team, launch products, and being part of the exec team to get 2 products approved by the FDA, and went through a lot of challenges at the time. But that was great experience. I think really prepared me well for the CEO role. And then I was the president and COO for Zai Lab, which is sort of a cross-border company. We took the company public both on NASDAQ and Hong Kong. So that's a sort of completely different set of experience. I also have a broader operational role, responsible for functions like tech ops and CMC. So I think that those broad set of experience really kind of prepare me well for the current role.
There's a question from the audience to both of you. Did you always know you wanted to be CEO? Was it purposeful as you built your skill set, or when did you know you wanted to be CEO?
I think that's probably an interesting question for all of us. I mean, I'll start. I mean, no, definitely not. That was never my plan. And again, there's many different ways to get there. look, I was at Venrock and I actually was enjoying the investing aspect of things. And yeah, we identified, or I found this early stage technology, which actually I think, Angie, you introduced me, remember, to Hallie Mitchell. But this is a
Oh, that's right. I can't believe that's another connection.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, Angie's now left Venrock, but then she's like, Ken, I met this really green person, you know, like she's a lawyer, but she thinks she has this amazing thing in liquid biopsy, and I know you've been looking at it. So then I connected with this individual, and then we ended up at Venrock, ended up seed investing, which was just so people understand what financing was like back in the 2010 timeframe. It was a $2 million seed that was tranched. Okay, so we put $500,000 in as the initial commitment. And this was in the whole area of non-invasive prenatal testing. And it was so early, right? It was out of an academic lab in Wisconsin, and there was no team. And so we couldn't recruit anyone to really run this because there also wasn't that much money. So then venture capitalists will step in and be the acting CEO. I always use the word acting because that's literally what you are doing. You are acting, okay? Like you're not qualified to be a CEO, you're acting as a CEO. And we said, hey, look, let's, Ken, why don't you go and be the acting CEO, just help it get off the ground. And I did, and then got the company a little bit more money raised. And then I decided to do that for a little bit. And it was supposed to just be like a 6 to 12 month gig. But you know, after a year or so, we made all this progress. I actually felt like I needed to replace myself because I was like, oh my gosh, the company is now actually at a next stage of inflection. You know, we're ready to commercialize and build a commercial lab. I've never done that. But it was the board, to their credit, that actually said, hey, Ken, why don't you just stay in that seat as the full-time CEO and build your team around you? So I literally stumbled into being CEO by accident, right? But I loved it. I mean, I ran that first company, Ariosa Diagnostics, for about 5 years. We got it to a global commercialization. We changed the standard of care now for all pregnant women, which is super cool. And after we got acquired by Roche, I was at Roche for about a year, helped with the integration. There was no doubt in my mind at that point that I was going to continue to be an entrepreneur because I didn't, as much as I enjoyed the investing, just being that entrepreneur and having that control and building, just at least for me, again, this is different, for me, was just such a right fitting role. And so I've kind of done it multiple times since then. I mean, with Angie, like, I'm curious, for you, it sounds like you always had that in mind. Like,
No,
why?
I never wanted to be first of all, I never crossed my mind that I could be a CEO. And I mean, I was CBO 3 times and I was like, I'm fine being number 2. I don't want the stress of being a CEO. And then it was only until I started interviewing for my 4th number 2 role, right? Where I was like, God, it's like awesome people I could work with, but they're not exciting because I always like a steep learning curve. And I was like, I've been there, done that. And then I had people, I think kind of like you with the board, who kind of nudged you, just do this, Ken. I had people like my longtime friend and mentor and now chairman, Rich Heyman, kind of like nudge / push me in, like, come on, Angie, go do this. And I did feel a responsibility. Like I was always someone who said, oh, we need more female leaders at the top. And I kind of said, well, what am I doing? Like I kind of feel a responsibility almost that I need to do this. And so I feel very lucky that, Fraser, Jamie Topper, gave me an opportunity that ended up being Amunix, right? And I started looking at some CEO roles, but Jamie was someone who believed in me, which I think is really, in this industry, there's like this, it's such a fad industry, right? And so if you've been in a successful company, all of a sudden you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if you've been unlucky, which most things fail, if you've been in a company that hasn't been doing well, you're oftentimes tainted because of that failure, which I think is so unfair, right? And at the time, I was in one of Jamie's losers in his portfolio. It was a company called Immuno-oncology. We IPO'd, it was amazing, and then our drug failed, which is classic in biotech. And we rebuilt, and ultimately we rebuilt a pipeline, and the company was sold for almost $2 billion. But at the time, we were still trading below cash. But Jamie still believed in me and gave me that opportunity, which led to Amunix. And I got to say, I loved it too. I loved it.
In hindsight, knowing what you know today, do you think you should have made the move sooner?
No, because honestly, going through the hard parts of Sierra, like years of trading below cash, having investors yell at me, I mean, it sucked, but being a public company and learning that part, I learned so much. I think that makes me a better CEO. But I think that's classic female. We want to like do the job before we have the job. So
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, as I reflect back on things, is there's nothing magical about being a CEO, right? There's no set of qualifications or pedigree that you need to be able to jump into the spot. I mean, you look at the diversity of the people who are CEOs, and I do think ultimately it probably comes down to one's belief in themselves, right? And just going for it, like taking that leap to say, I mean, obviously you have to have other people that believe in you too to fund you, et cetera. But I wonder to what extent sometimes we are our own obstacle, right, towards actually taking on the leadership positions that we're probably more than qualified to do, but we just have a lot of self-doubt.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm in awe of, some of these, I call them the young kids now, but that's because they're much older, but who, they go start a company right out of grad school.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, I'm like, oh my God, that's so much harder. You don't have any experience. But on the other hand, I have a lot of respect. Like, wow, they've got balls to go do that.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, maybe just round out Tao, like, when did you decide you wanted to be the CEO? Because you were also, you were at Portola, and then, you were at Zai, you were president, right? Big role, but you still weren't at the very, very top. So I don't know this. Like, when did you think, I just want to be the one running the company?
Actually, same like you guys never really thought about I need to be a CEO. I didn't really think of that way. So how I approach my career has been always I want to do something interesting, right? And I want to do something new, after a while to continue to kind of, broaden my experience. So when I left Zai Lab, Angie, I also share the same common friend, Jamie Topper. And, when I was large pharma, I dealt with Fraser, and Jamie basically asked me whether, well, Tao, why don't you come to Fraser and be a venture partner? And, trying to figure out something, find a technology, find a product, try to build a company, right? And I thought that was really interesting. And so that's what I did, and was fortunate enough to find a very interesting, platform technology, which formed the basis to build Attovia. And I became the CEO. But like you guys, I just love it. The role is it is 24/7. You never get any mental break, which is challenging. But on the other hand, like after like a quarter century, you really have seen the good and bad, right? You really want to, well, this is sort of the culture I want to build, and this is the vision I want to implement, and you have the freedom to do that. I think that's like a very, very satisfying.
I think the constant problem solving, the building, that sense of ownership. But for me, I also love the developing of people and the I just, you guys know, I never had kids. I couldn't have kids. And I just seeing young people and seeing their potential. Like I can see someone straight out of grad school and say, oh my God, I can see that someday you're going to be a CSO. Just to kind of grow them and see them thrive. Like that is a huge thrill for me, almost as much as, having an impact on patients. So, that's kind of why I went back into the CEO role after selling Amunix, because I missed that so much.
But one of the things, though, I mean, it's again, this is a CEO focused, whatever we're calling this, a webinar or podcast or whatever. I mean, but I think what's interesting is we've all gotten here through different paths. There's like, if we look at the CEO leadership in biotech, or especially in pharma, there is at least what appears to be, right, a lower proportion of folks that are Asian, right, or Asian American that are sitting in that role. Look, I don't know exactly why that is. Is there hurdles? Are those hurdles sort of self-inflicted? Or are there sort of more systemic things? But I think were there, and I think some people are asking this too on the Q&A is, did any of you face any challenges, right, based upon your background, your ethnicity? I mean, I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about just for a little bit here.
I think, one of my good friends, who's a venture capitalist, Cami Samuel, has always said, gosh, Angie, you not only have the glass ceiling, but you have the bamboo ceiling, right? Being an Asian female. And I think Asian females have a particularly challenging situation. You don't know how many young Asian females I've pulled aside and said, look, if you're too quiet and too meek, you're everyone's going to know you can do a lot of great work, so they'll throw you a ton of work, but you'll never get promoted. They'll just think you don't have that executive presence, right? And then if you're direct, if you're intense, you have strong opinions, they're going to say you're the tiger lady bitch, right? And so you can't win as an Asian female. You're like, standing on a pinhead. But I do tell Asian women, look, if you're going to veer on one side, veer on the like super intense, direct, tiger lady. Because look, every female CEO I know has been called a bitch or difficult. So there's just unconscious bias there with regards to with behaviors that females have. But I do think some of the things that are part of our culture can be limiting, especially as an Asian female, right? Like I was taught, like, it's always, we're in service, right? Like, I was always in service of my dad or whatever. And so I can see those behaviors where, okay, it's all these Asian females. Oh, I'll get the coffee. I'll take the notes. I won't sit at the main table. I'll sit on the side. I remember one of our rock star clinical people who's now very senior at a company, Asian woman, she would always leave the main table chairs for others. And I was like, you have to, I mean, it's that Sheryl Sandberg thing, but you have to sit at the table, right? And it's not just for you, but it's for your direct reports, and you are modeling for other people. So I definitely felt that. I definitely felt that I had to figure out a way to be my authentic self, but learn to be more skilled about it, right? I think there's an element of just becoming more skilled, but still staying yourself. I mean, there was when I was young, I did feel like, oh my gosh, do I have to be like super serious and quiet? And, and I realized you are at your best when you're just yourself.
Yeah, Angie, I would think that doesn't just apply to Asian women. I think it's applied to East Asians in general. It's pretty interesting. I went to, Tsinghua University for undergrad. It's one of the top 2 most prestigious university in China. And we had this school motto, basically a sentence of 4 Chinese characters engraved on a piece of marble. Basically, it says, actions are better than words, or maybe actions speak louder than words. I mean, this is like the founders of the university say, well, you guys need to do this like a century ago, right? Really, it's very deeply rooted in Chinese culture, probably in Korean cultures as well. I mean, we're taught to be modest and quiet, be extremely selective about speaking out, really kind of bury your heads and do a good job and hope good things will happen, right? This is just what our culture taught us. And I just realized that doesn't really work in the American business world, right? We really need to kind of have a strategy to address that. And that probably hinder a lot of the growth from
I mean, my parents didn't even know what networking is, or could they even do it?
Right. Yeah. It was basically like, I think for me, the 2 things that I reflect on and learned is that one is, with Asians, there is a lot of deference, right? Sort of like be humble, be quiet. Yeah. And as a result, that is not really what you are looking for in a CEO, right? You don't want the person who's humble and quiet and deferent, right? You need someone who's going to be the leader to take charge, And the second one, I think that I had to sort of overcome is, at least, I think a lot of us growing up, again, as second gens is, it's like you have to just do really, really well. Don't fail, right? And so it's like, you can't even get like an A-, right? Or something like that.
Yep.
I mean, and I think that that's really also hard. You have to overcome and shed that sort of mental sort of expectation, right? Because in our industry, you're failing all the time. And actually, I always tell my teams, the fastest path to success is solely dependent on how fast you can fail. Because the faster you fail, the faster you find the path to be successful. So I do think our, both culturally, our upbringing, et cetera, of deference and having to almost be perfect, right? Those two things are not really consistent with what it means to be an effective CEO, which is pretty much be proactive, be out there and accept and embrace failure, right?
Yeah.
And the fortunate thing is I think we all learned that, but it's not like someone told it, right? We had to figure that out, I feel like, a lot of ourselves. But I'm hopeful that now with us and many others that have been successful, that we can sort of at least pave the path or at least show the dirt road for others now, that like, this is the way you have to be if you want to be a CEO and be successful.
Yeah, you're touching on something that there's been quite a number of questions around is, can you speak to any moments of failures and what you learned from them?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a
I've
lot.
had so many.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, there's many. I mean, I think for me, like, I'm gonna use my first company because again, I'm starting off at REO, so I like know nothing. I've never actually worked in a company. I've been a physician or a researcher or just a consultant. And I just left Venrock full time, and I remember we're 2 months in from having just raised the first money. It was like $13 million. And we had licensed this technology. And I remember sitting in my hotel room looking at this being like, wait a second, I don't think this is going to work. So I'm just like, this is like not ideal. So I went back and spoke with my CTO and others. And yeah, we all came to the agreement that it wasn't going to work. And it's like, what do you do at that point? Like, it was just about a matter of, okay, we got on the whiteboard, we sketched out a bunch of ideas, and then we just charged forward to say, we hit a roadblock here, but it's not an insurmountable obstacle. Let's just divert and find another path. And fortunately, we did, and we developed a test that ended up working and selling really, really well. But yeah, there's many times where things don't work, right? And I think don't take it personally is what I would say.
I was about to say that, yeah.
Don't take it out on your team. Look, I look at this as every year in biotech, at least, or pharma, there's like 30 to 50 drugs that are approved a year. But when you think about the number of companies globally that are working on drug development, which is probably in the tens of thousands, and if you even look at clinicaltrials.gov, you look at the number of phase 1 studies, which is in the many thousands, the expected outcome, if you're in a biotech company or even if you're a pharma working on a project, is that it's going to fail.
Right.
So you have to understand that the chance to succeed is really an outlier, and that if something doesn't work, that was the expectation, right? Like that's not what people are hoping for, but that is numerically and statistically the expectation.
Yeah, I always say, as long as you feel like you did the right experiment and you executed well on that, that's all you can ask for, right? And then you ran the experiment.
Yeah.
Biology is really complex.
And there are so many things that can go wrong in what we do, right? I will give an example. Even you're at like a commercial stage, you have, phase 3 win, things could still go wrong. I mean, the first product we work on at Portola, we actually have a successful, pivotal trial, and we actually filed for BLA approval, and then, we're kind of hoping, good things will happen, but we got a, long CRL from the FDA, right? For, manufacturing deficiency. It's actually interesting, at least at that time, FDA still, faxed the CRL to you. So it was like a 23-page CRL that, that 18 pages of it are CMC deficiencies. So it's just even you already have successful clinical trials, you can still run into big problems. But if the management team bond together, crisis mode, we make it happen and refiled and got the drug approved. So it's just attention to detail is so critical in our industry. Nothing can really go wrong. There are so many steps, right? Yes.
And I think this is why investors do place a high premium on the quality of the team, because shit is going to hit the fan in any biotech. There are going to be bumps, but I do think great teams rise above it and problem solve their way out of it in many situations.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you had mentioned before, and I think it is interesting to talk about, is great teams or executive presence. So I guess what does that mean, and how does one get that? I think I was sharing the other day. I mean, I don't even know where this term came from, executive presence, because 5 years ago it didn't exist. It's like the term atmospheric river. So for those on the West Coast, right? If it's gonna rain, people are like, oh, there's an atmospheric river. I'm like, what does that mean? Does that just mean clouds and rain? So I mean, what do you guys think what is executive presence? And is it something you have or don't have, and how do you get it? Or is it just sort of a term that people throw out there but don't really know what it means?
I think it's two things. So one, I think it's a term sometimes that is referencing unconscious bias, right? And if you talk to recruiters, they'll say they hear that a lot about Asian candidates, right? But I do think it's an element of, can you sound confident and command a room and give other people confidence, right? I think that's, I don't know, Tao, you're shaking your head. What do you think?
Yeah, no, same. I think for me is does this person have that clarity of thought, right? I think I once read basically people talk about you actually have the ability to explain the future and make it seem inevitable. I think both of you are very good at that. So that's to me is sort of executive presence. But I also think unique for maybe for Asians, I think generally we're pretty empathetic people, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think being an empathy leader with a lot of empathy actually really resonate with me. To me, you don't have to be arrogant, right? You can still be very, very effective CEO, but at the same time being an empathetic leader.
Oh, look at all the hearts coming up. I mean, man, wow, you're just touching the emotions of the people. I haven't seen so many hearts come up until just now.
Yeah.
But you are speaking to the very different kinds of leaders. And there's people with very quiet, like Tao, you have a quiet charisma, right? Like anyone who's worked with you, like they follow you, right? Like one of my superstars at Amunix, she met you and she was like, I want to work for that guy, right? There is that something that each of you have that people are like, I'm going to follow that person. And whether that's associated with executive presence, I do think that's critical. And I think that if for whatever reason you have a revolving door of people who keep leaving you, you've got to have some self-reflection and examination. Because it's got to be something about you, right? And I'm a big believer, like, go get a coach, be open-minded to it's actually really fun. Like I always love learning. So learning about myself and my deficiencies and where I can become more skilled, I love it, So I do think that's, as a leader, that's something I'm very proud of, is building teams that want to work with me, that stay with me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, as I think about executive or CEO presence, I think it's sometimes CEOs don't fully appreciate, and this is for people that are thinking about being CEO or younger CEOs, it's just you're the leader of the company, right? And you may have a board of directors, but the board is not there to intervene operationally, right? The board wants to be there to support the CEO and his or her vision. And I think sometimes, like, this is something I appreciated, relatively early on, is that, like, no one should know the company, the situation, the dynamics better than the CEO, right? And what people really are looking for, and this is my experience, like, your employees, your senior management boards, people want to know that there's a clear plan, right? And they want to know that that plan has been well thought out. I think that is the biggest job of the CEO, is to sort of lay that out and then to execute and manage to it. And I mean, Angie's been on my board both before and again now today, and she knows that for me, I say, really the board to me has one primary role, and that's each quarter is to determine whether or not they want to still keep the CEO in the seat. And because if the board needs to start getting involved in strategic or operational and other decisions, that becomes chaotic. And the reality is the wrong person is leading the company. And so, when I think about CEO presence, it's about realizing that you're the leader. Everyone is looking to you, including the board, to sort of steer the ship. And you've got to own that, and you've got to want to own that, right, in order to be able to be a successful CEO.
Yeah, I guess I do. I love having many different brains around the table, because most things in biotech are gray. A lot of times there's no obvious right or wrong answer. So to have people who look at it from a different perspective, and that's what I value from my board. Like, we do think about it 24/7. Sometimes we're thinking about it so much we might have blinders. So sometimes it's really helpful to have that outside perspective. And I think that helps in my strategic thinking, but I absolutely agree. The CEO needs to drive it. And I always tell my team this, like, we live and breathe this 24/7. The board comes in and thinks about it each quarter, right? Like, we are always going to them with our plan, our rationale for that plan. We're not going to them to say, which one of these options should we do? Like, we should never be in that position.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, maybe I'll just share one reflection. Very early on in my career, the CEO of Scios, when I worked for him, he basically literally told me, Tao, in biotech, you need to learn to deal with ambiguity. So that was like 25 years ago. So I think really the CEO role is, you need to learn to kind of deal with that, and, really come up with a good plan, trying to execute, but don't also not afraid to pivot, right? I mean, because things like change in our industry, and we deal with failures, setbacks frequently. You kind of need to have this mindset of it's gonna be okay. We're gonna just keep going after the problem, and we're here to stay for longer term to solve the hard problems, right? So I think that helps me just put things in perspective when you deal with failures and setbacks.
Someone was asking about stress and grit. I mean, and I think each of us may have different perspectives on that, but do you find the job stressful? How do you handle that? How do you balance? Like another question probably because I was like, how do you balance, the professionalism of being a CEO versus own personal interests? Do you set boundaries? Do you not set boundaries? I'd be curious as to how each of you deal with that.
It's hard to set boundaries when you're the CEO. I mean, let's just be honest. I do always express to my entire team, look, family always comes first, right? You never, when you're on your deathbed, you never say, oh, I wish I would have worked more. But you do have those regrets about how much time you spent with your dad or whatever. So that's my kind of guiding light. Like, family always comes first. But look, it is a 24/7 job in many ways. I'll be honest, when I first took the job at Amunix, I was so stressed to the point where I was not enjoying the job. And I'm just a believer, life is short. I don't want to live, I was like, I don't want to live this way. Like, if I'm miserable because I'm so stressed, like, I'm totally fine not being a CEO. And so I really thought hard about maybe I should just step back because I don't want to live this stress. And ultimately, my good friend Sheila Gajathri suggested I get an executive coach. And they're different from, your chairperson. They just have they're very skilled in helping you think through things. And she helped me refine the joy in the job. And she made me realize, and maybe it's very Asian, like a lot of my stress was worrying about like, oh my God, in 2 years, if this drug fails, like I've let everyone down. And, it was the fear of failure. And I think that was the lesson I think Ken pointed to earlier is you have to get over that fear of failure. And I think all of us are lucky enough and privileged enough to be in a position like we don't need to do this job, right? So I'm kind of at the point where like, let me just enjoy it. Let me find the joy in this job. And if at any point, for some reason, I'm not enjoying the job, I'll be out, right? Like that's incredible freedom that we are so privileged to have. But that gives me a lot of freedom, I think.
Yeah, I would just also share that I think it is CEO is a lonely job, right? But for me, actually having a group of close advisors, friends, you can talk to, is very helpful. I mean, you kind of think about you don't need to solve this problem just by yourself, right? You actually have a group of close advisors and like board members, Angie, good friends, advisor like Ken. I can talk to you guys, right, about my issues. And I think that applies to the CEO, but probably apply to everybody, right, at any level. Making sure that you have a group of advisors you really trust, right? You can kind of brainstorm your problem with them, and that has been very helpful for me to kind of deal with stress, right? To think about I don't need to deal with this just by myself.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, for me, like, Tao and I, we'll go play golf, right? I mean, that's one way to get advice to each other. You got 4.5 hours, right? To just sort of like pick each other's brains. I mean, the golf probably ends up being more stressful than actually talking to each other. But I think, there's this common theme of just embracing failure and realizing that if something doesn't work out, it's fine, and not to blame yourself, right? I think that's the most, and I think that's maybe this is, a little bit more so for those of us that grew up in an East Asian background, is because, you keep on hearing like, you always got to do well, don't fail. And so, I'm hoping that this next generation doesn't have as much of that sort of that voice in their head, but I definitely heard that early on, right? Is like, you can't fail. Like failure is like letting down the family name, right? Or something like that. So, look, again, the expected outcome is that things are not going to work, right? And if something busts, the thing is, realize that the experience that you gain from that is valuable as you go to seek out your next venture.
You learn the most from those failures, I think. And I think what was powerful for me, even just working with my coach, is she's like, okay, let's just play the tape out. Let's just say it's worst case scenario and this drug does fail or whatever. What's going to happen? Right. And I was like, well, I've been through that before. Like it sucks, but we survive and we pick ourselves up and go do it again. Right. So once you kind of realize like it's okay, and even if you can embrace it, and Ken, I think similar philosophy, like if we're going to fail, let's fail fast and then move on.
Yeah, definitely. I think like maybe we could probably start wrapping it up here, because we went past 45 and we're close to the top of the hour. I mean, the one question I'm seeing here, I think it's an interesting one. Like what one recommendation would you give to your pre-CEO self? Which probably is applicable to anyone that's thinking about being a CEO.
Yeah.
I could start because I thought about this, and just because I was having a conversation with someone the other day, is make sure that you really want it, right? Like that you want it, not it's because it's something that you think, oh, it's cool to be a CEO, or because you think or don't do it for the money. Definitely don't do it for the money, right? And the reason why I say is make sure that you really want it is because, at least for me, I think being a CEO, which I've been doing for the last 15 years, it becomes part of your identity, right? I mean, for me, again, there is no separation between personal and professional, right? I mean, me being a CEO and whatever company I'm at, it completely intertwines with my life. And in a way, like, I sort of think about this, I'm 50, and I do think that the current company that I'm at is probably the last time I'll be a full-time CEO, at least for a biopharma. I might go off and do something else, but at least for the life sciences industry, this is probably it.
That's what you said after Rayze.
Yeah.
Well, that one ended a lot faster than expected.
Bullshit.
But I mean, it's to the point where this is part of me, and in a way, I know that I will be sad once it's no longer part of my life, because there will be an empty void. But that's what it means. Like, I would tell myself is, know what you're getting into, but realize that it does become part of who you are. And I know that once I stop being a CEO, like, part of me will have died, right? And not to make it sound sad or morbid, but it's true. There'll be an emptiness, right, that can't be filled, because it is such an integral part of who I am. So I guess I would just tell myself is, you can do it, but make sure that you really want it. And at least for me, it's been an incredibly rewarding and amazing journey. But I don't think it's for everybody, right?
Yeah, I agree. Don't do it because kind of that Asian mentality, I've got to get to that CEO level, right? It's not, some people are best loving being the CMO or whatever. My advice is one, and I think Tao touched on it. The CEO job can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. And just in your journey in general, and part of the impetus of Elevate is find your people, find your tribe, right? Many of us will, and I did, deal with various levels of unconscious bias where I went through periods where my self-esteem was really low. And again, my chairman, Rich Heyman, I remember one day on a phone call, he said, Angie, just find your people. There are so many people who believe in you, and will support you. And that just makes all the difference, right? I'm at the point in my life, life's too short. I only want to deal with people who have humility, who are super smart, who are kind. And outside of that, I just don't want to give up any other space.
I think we have 1 or 2 minutes. I'll just say, look at 3 of us, right? We all have very different paths. None of us have really wanted to be a CEO or expected to be a CEO, but we kind of end up being there. Just really enjoy what you do. I find the things that you really enjoy doing, and continue to challenge you intellectually. And you don't need to be forced to do this or rush into it, right? Just kind of take your time and find the things that you really love, and if you can
and
get
you'll
there,
probably be good at it if you love
it. Exactly. Yeah, and exactly. Yeah, but that will be sort of my advice.
Well, we went way over time. I do want to give a shout out to our executive director, Elaine Chen of Elevate, who was really the impetus behind this. And stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have many more of these. And please reach out to Elaine if you have ideas of future webinars you'd like to see. And with that, I guess, we'll close it out.
It was fun. I mean, I'm not sure about the listeners, but I enjoyed talking to the 2 of you as always. At least I had a good time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.